Our world is full of diagrams, graphic representations of everything from the solar system to the hidden origins of life. They have a unique ability to express complex ideas simply, and an intellectual and artistic beauty that has the power to inspire awe and change our perceptions. There is one diagram that has gone beyond our world. Its purpose is to communicate fundamental facts about us to life on other planets. And it left Earth in 1972 on board the Pioneer 10 space probe. It's the most enterprising and optimistic diagram ever created. A diagram to transcend all languages and cultures. And now it's billions of miles away beyond our solar system.
It was called the Pioneer Plaque, and it was a hugely ambitious project. One single diagram would have to be Earth's message to the stars. It would represent the whole of humanity, show where we are and what we are like. As well as being a scientific tool for locating the Earth and the solar system, it also had to be an object of beauty. So how could one single diagram do all of that? What do you put in and what do you leave out? And ultimately, what does it tell us, and unknown others, about who we are?
At 8:42 p.m. on Thursday, the 2nd of March, 1972, the unmanned space probe Pioneer 10 is launched from Cape Canaveral Air Force Base in Florida. It heads for the huge planet of Jupiter and then on towards the edge of our solar system.
It's by no means out of the question that there are forms of life in the clouds of Jupiter. Indeed, if you viewed the solar system from afar, I think you could make an argument that life on Jupiter was more likely than life anywhere else, including on the Earth.
Pioneer 10's mission was to take detailed photographs of Jupiter and its moons, and to study the atmosphere of outer space, its particles and solar winds, the flux and velocity of the abundant dust particles.
But Pioneer 10 also had a second mission. Firmly attached to the antennae support struts and protected from erosion by interstellar dust, it was the most enterprising, artistic and scientific diagram of all time. The ultimate diagram, the Pioneer Plaque. In carefully engraved graphic images and mathematical symbols, the plaque would reveal the Earth's location in the galaxy and would tell extraterrestrial intelligent life what humans look like. NASA were extremely excited.
The problem facing the designers was how to decide what to include, what science and what art. The original is billions of miles away in space. But this is the engravers in San Carlos, California, where the plaque was produced. It was made of gold-covered aluminium. There were in fact two copies of the plaque that were sent out into space. One on Pioneer 10, the other on Pioneer 11, launched a year later. Both were created from this template, the Master Pioneer Plaque.
It's really extraordinarily heavy. Of course, the original plaque that was on the Pioneer would have been about this size and much lighter because you wouldn't want to disrupt the balance of the spacecraft. And this is really quite a special diagram because all the other diagrams I've seen in this series have been drawn, and this one is literally dug out of this piece of metal.
The diagram has a beauty that no drawn reproduction could imitate. It has a curious period feel about it as well, which is difficult to pinpoint, but it's definitely there. Perhaps it's the font, the width of the drawn lines. Or is it those haircuts? These human figures do look classically 70s American.
The intention behind the plaque was to communicate rudimentary information about the planet Earth and its inhabitants. It's actually a really simple picture, but that's the point about a diagram. You need to throw away information, so you just keep what is essential. It's interesting, it's a real nice combination of mathematics and art. But what does it all mean? Well, some of it's pretty obvious, the pictures of the man and the woman, I understand. If you go down to the bottom here, then there are lots of little circles, and these are a picture of our solar system, the planets in order. So we've got the Sun here, and we've got Mercury, Venus, Earth, and this is where we live. And above each of the planets are little things which I know actually are binary numbers. They're ones and dashes. Instead of a 0, which might look like another planet actually, the artist has used a dash to indicate nothing. And you can tell that the plaque came from the third planet, our planet, planet Earth, because there's a line being drawn from the planet out to a little picture of the Pioneer probe.
The whole design assumes that binary mathematics, and indeed drawing, are not only international, but universal languages. At first glance, interpreting the diagram is not easy. This dumbbell, for instance, is a unit of measurement, I think. And this wonderful star diagram, which fans out across the plaque, depicts the location of certain pulsars or pulsating stars. But how does that work?
It's intriguing because the very nature of this diagram is that it's two-dimensional and it's actually depicting a three-dimensional universe. The whole plaque is encoding such interesting information, but how did they decide what they were going to include? What do all these symbols mean? And if you're representing life on Earth, then why did they draw the figures naked?
The plaque was designed by two astrophysicists, Carl Sagan and Frank Drake. And together with Carl Sagan's then wife, Linda, they conceived the plaque and supervised its production.
Sagan wanted the plaque to transcend the ugliness of 20th century life, war, nuclear threat and all that. He also wanted it to be an object of beauty that would represent all mankind.
There were, of course, parameters. The plaque would have to be small and light enough not to disturb the delicate technology of the spacecraft. And it would have to communicate facts in a straightforward and unambiguous way. In Mountain View, California, the SETI Institute scans space for signs of extraterrestrial communications. Its founder is Frank Drake, and after a lifetime searching, he still believes in the possibility of other intelligent life in the cosmos. Back in December 1971, his friend Carl Sagan suggested they work together on a design for their own interstellar message.
Well, we thought the most interesting thing to the extraterrestrials would be, what are we like? And so we wanted figures of a man and a woman. And then some information about what planet or place this plaque came from and how long ago, because it may be millions of years till the plaque is intercepted by someone. And so we needed a means to establish time and place of launch of the spacecraft, and we did that by using a map showing the location of 14 pulsars with respect to the sun.
So how does it do all that?
Well, the center of the map represents the solar system. And from there, we see lines going out radially. Each line represents the direction and distance to a pulsar. A pulsar is the remnant of a supernova explosion, which spins very rapidly and as a result sends out very uniformly spaced in time pulses of radio emission. So this was a way by which the extraterrestrials, even after millions of years, could recognize which object was being described by its pulsing frequency. And the pulsar's pulsing frequency is shown in binary arithmetic, which is the simplest number system to provide time and length information. And of course, they have 14 independent values for this, from which they could deduce from where and when the plaque was launched.
Is 14 just enough?
Actually, 2 pulsars would have been enough. But we gave them 14, I guess, just to make life easy for them.
The universe is three-dimensional, so is there information here about what angle you're looking at?
Actually, there is. Now, of course, our galaxy is very nearly flat. However, there is on each line, if you look, a mark
Oh, yes.
which shows the distance above or below the galactic plane that the pulsar is. So that actually provides the third dimension, exactly what you're concerned with.
Ah, very interesting.
Drake and Sagan assumed that the language of science, and especially mathematics, must be common to all technological civilizations. If true, an extraterrestrial intelligence would understand the plaque because science and maths will be the same throughout the universe. The issue they now faced was getting their diagram into space. They took their plans to NASA in December 1971. Pioneer 10 was scheduled for launch the following February. Time was against them, but they hoped to persuade NASA of the diagram's importance.
This is the Ames Research Centre near Mountain View, and it's one of the biggest space centres of its kind. It's where the Pioneer probes were first conceived and managed. The project was started in 1964 when it was proposed that a spacecraft could be sent out of the solar system into galactic space. The project was well advanced, so would they be happy with the idea of the Pioneer probe carrying a message from humankind?
In 1971, it was just over 2 years after the Apollo landing on the moon, and NASA wanted a new project that was equally ambitious. The unmanned Pioneer would go where no spacecraft had been before, to the outer planets.
The major aim was to go to Jupiter, because that, as you know, is the largest planet in the solar system. It actually comprises 75% of all the planetary mass, so it's a very exciting venture, and let's do it. By going by Jupiter, which has such tremendous mass and gravitational potential, it made use of the gravitational assist of Jupiter to accelerate it. The launch speed was 30,000 miles per hour. We tripled it by just going through that. It was like a slingshot, just catapulted by Jupiter out of the solar system.
What do you think of the plaque as a diagram to send out there?
Well, I just think it's fantastic. It's a little bit complicated in the interpretation of it, but this was Earth's first emissary to the outer space.
NASA didn't approve the plaque immediately, and in the meantime, Sagan and Drake had to finish designing it in the few weeks remaining. So far, they'd worked out how to show where the Earth was. Now they decided that it might be useful to include a means to calculate time and distance. The basic chemistry of the universe provided the answer.
We needed to give them a time unit, which was universal. And we did that with the sketch up here, which shows the hydrogen atom in its 2 lowest energy states. And when the hydrogen atom switches from one energy state to the other, it radiates a radio wave with a certain wavelength. And with a certain frequency of oscillation. The time between oscillations becomes the time unit, and the wavelength becomes the length unit for the message.
Could you explain how you can work out the height of the woman from the plaque?
The height can be worked out because we have here a line drawn at her feet, and up here a line at her head, and the distance between there and there, of course, is her height. And sure enough, there is a number here in binary, which is the number 8. So this is telling us that the typical human and woman is 8 somethings high. Well, what's the something? It's the wavelength. So it's 8 times 8 inches, roughly, which is 64 inches, which is, in fact, the average height of human females on Earth.
Everyone involved in the Pioneer project was starstruck. Carl Sagan had been involved in NASA's space program since the 1950s. He'd been an advisor to the Apollo 11 astronauts prior to their groundbreaking flight to the moon. He wanted the world to share his excitement about the possibilities of space.
But in the remote contingency that there are interstellar spacefaring societies which might someday pick up this derelict, no longer radioing, we thought we would put a message on it, and the plaque has served a very useful purpose in making us think about what sort of impression we might wish to give to the cosmos.
But Carl Sagan had a second passionate reason for wanting to communicate with the cosmos. The Pioneer project was an attempt to reach out the hand of friendship to unknown civilizations. For Sagan, it was a positive development in a pretty negative world.
When Carl was young, growing up in the 1930s and 40s, he grew up reading popular science fiction magazines, Astounding, Amazing. He loved to speculate about the possibility that flying saucers came from other worlds. The flying saucer craze was very big back in the 40s. He eventually outgrew flying saucers and became a big skeptic about them. But I think that youthful love of the possibility that there is life out there in space enthralled him his entire life, and he never really outgrew it. It was sort of like someone who's very religious when they're young, and they eventually outgrow the details of the religion, but they never outgrow its spirit.
Is it important to understand the politics of the time to
Yes.
really understand this message?
Very much so, because remember, the early 1970s was a time, and I was a teenager at the time, when Americans were utterly traumatized about their place in the world, about what was going on in the country. It was the time of the Vietnam War. It was a time when many Americans had lost faith in their government. They had lost faith that the American way was going to be the way of the world. It was really, in many ways, a very depressing time to be an American. And Carl Sagan was one of those people who believed there was no reason to be depressed, because he believed that we were entering into a great new age of exploration, in which we would survey the cosmos as the great explorers had explored the oceans of the Earth. We would discover worlds out there that would show that the universe was not a hostile place. It was not an indifferent place. What Carl Sagan gave us was a universe that had all the meaning of a religious realm, but had no gods, and the only gods were human beings or their extraterrestrial counterparts. That's the kind of universe he wanted to give us.
In their attempt to communicate with life on other planets, Sagan and Drake had been determined to make the plaque a scientific message, an exact diagram. Their next task, showing what we look like, should have been the easy part, but it proved to be far more contentious than they'd expected.
The plaque was meant to communicate information about life on Earth to extraterrestrial intelligence that didn't know about humans and their ethnic diversity. But for me, the figures are very Western in their ethnicity. And also the body language of the woman is very telling. The man is looking outwards towards the universe, while the woman's head is tilted looking towards the man. She's almost secondary, quite deferential. They wanted the figures to be representative, scientific, but did they also want them to be political?
The person given the task of depicting the human form to outer space was Sagan's wife. A professional artist, Linda Saltzman Sagan, had been a student at the prestigious Fine Arts School at the Boston Museum. But by virtue of marrying an eminent scientist, she suddenly found herself with the responsibility of representing all of humankind with just 2 figures. She took her inspiration from the classical world.
I had some general art books that I had from when I was in art school. And I kind of like flipped through them, and there were the Greek statues, and I thought, well, they really cared about proportion. I wanted to give the best proportions I could do, and that was the inspiration. I wanted each figure to have different racial features. The woman has very almond eyes and straight hair, and I made the man's hair curly. I made his nose kind of flattened so that they were multicultural, that they had different human characteristics.
What about clothes? Was there any question of them wearing clothes?
How do you dress them? You dress them in tribal costume? Do you dress them in haute couture? What do you do with them? No, naked, I think, was the way we decided to go.
The beauty of the design of the diagram lay in its precise maths and science. But for Linda, that presented a problem. She had to decide how much anatomical detail to include. This may have been the free and easy 1970s, but mainstream America was still prudish when it came to drawings of naked women.
A lot of the statues that I had been looking at, they didn't have very specific women genitalia, so I was torn. There were only so many days, I think like 5 days, until the plaque could be put on the spacecraft. And Carl, he said, don't do anything because we don't want to get into a big fight with NASA and give anybody an excuse not to put the plaque on the spacecraft.
Linda went along with her husband's view and didn't include female genitalia in the diagram. But controversy didn't end there. As news of the plaque spread, questions were raised about why the female figure appeared submissive to the male. Why had the male been given the job of greeting the universe?
Feminism was just beginning to be a big talked about topic, and a lot of women said, well, why weren't we greeting the universe? Why didn't we have our hand raised? And the problem was, if you both had your hand raised, the extraterrestrials would think that everybody on Earth walked around with their hands like this. So there was that kind of consideration.
The clock was now ticking down to liftoff, and public reaction to the plaque was gathering momentum. With less than a week to go, it was national news. But it was not at all clear how Americans felt. Would they support the plaque, or might there be a public outcry?
This is an article that was written in the New York Times on February the 27th, 1972. It's written by the late Walter Sullivan, who was a very eminent writer, science writer for the New York Times. And he has some lovely descriptions in here. He says the Pioneer probe will sail indefinitely through the vast reaches of the Milky Way galaxy. And he also tries to describe some of the science on the plaque. He has a go at the pulsar map, and he says the rate could be used to identify each pulsar, much as each lighthouse has its characteristic rhythm. So, on the one hand, there was a great deal of excitement about a serious attempt to communicate with life in outer space. But on the other, there was a bit of a credibility gap between the creators of the Pioneer plaque and the public, for whom extraterrestrial intelligence and aliens seemed a little bit whimsical.
And as launch day approached, there were still some critics who wanted to stop the plaque because they saw the naked figures as a form of pornography. The issue just wouldn't go away. Even the government was nervous.
NASA was very sensitive to this because there were some members of Congress in the American Congress, who were very conservative, and that they were offended that the taxpayers' money was being used to send smut to space. To them, this was smut. I know I had the personal experience of discussing this on the national morning television show in Canada, and when I was through describing it, I looked around and everybody in the room was horrified. I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "Oh, we're all going to be fired. We're going to lose our jobs. This is the first time a naked human has ever been shown on Canadian television." and it's forbidden.
And you broadcast it to the whole of space.
All of space and all of Canada.
Whilst debates continued, the probe took off from Florida with the Plaque firmly attached and began its long journey through the dark acres of space. It quickly became the first spacecraft to travel through the asteroid belt. And in December 1973, ahead of time, it reached Jupiter and immediately sent back magnificent colour photos of the planet's surface. And then on it went, catapulted by Jupiter's gravitational field into outer galactic space.
By the summer of 1983, the Pioneer Plaque had passed the orbits of Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune and Pluto. On the 13th of June, it reached the ultimate frontier, the edge of our solar system. And then it went beyond. Pioneer 10 sent back its final farewell message on the 22nd of January 2003 and has never been heard from again.
Throughout the 1970s, Sagan and Drake devised messages for outer space. The Pioneer Plaque had revealed just how difficult it was to capture the variety of human life in one diagram. So in 1977, they developed a more complex message called the Voyager Golden Record. The record went one step further than a diagram and featured greetings in 55 languages, 12 minutes of Earth sounds such as a human heartbeat and falling rain, music by Brahms and Chuck Berry. And instead of naked humans, NASA accepted the picture of a pregnant woman. We don't, of course, know whether the Pioneer Plaque has been seen by any extraterrestrials. If it has, they haven't replied. But for Frank Drake, the purpose and importance of the original diagram is undiminished.
Both the Plaque and the Voyager record are going to outlast the Earth. In 4 billion years, our sun is going to grow, become a supergiant, and swallow up the Earth and destroy everything we know. The Plaque will still be there to show that once upon a time, there was a civilization like ours out there in the Milky Way.
The Pioneer Plaque was a fascinating attempt to express as simply as possible the position of the Earth and the appearance of its inhabitants. In some sense, it was trying to be the ultimate diagram, conveying complicated ideas in a way that words could never do. But it's based on a big assumption that mathematics and drawing are not just an international language, but a universal one. Whether or not that is true, only the confluence of time and space will tell.
Stay with us here on BBC HD for some festive music coming up next.